a dreamy tale about a frail boy reincarnating into his favorite gaming world as the king of the cursed lands with his ever-faithful subordinate, Atou, who is also his right hand. Together they plan to create a model land, giving refuge to the oppressed, where peace will prevail and will be a living example of civic organization and modern technology. Atou dies at the age of 18, after battling with a prolonged illness. The hapless guy is frustrated, but he accepts his death rather calmly to his surprise. As soon as he progresses through his final journey, his consciousness and senses fall into darkness, and he presumably scratches through rocks and smells grass. In no time, sudden brightness strikes his face as he hears the rustling of leaves around him. He looks here and there and realizes that this is where one ends up when they die. The air around him is quite chilly, but very fresh and pleasant. Suddenly a female voice startles him, wondering whether he has woken up. He is further astonished to recognize the dress that the person is wearing, who has addressed him. So finally, when the lady makes her appearance, Atou is surprised to see that she is Atou. The gorgeous Atou refers to Atou as her king. Atou is one of the hero units in a country management simulation game called Eternal Nations. In this game, one plays with several races and nations that exist in the fantasy world, trying to dominate the world in a turn-based game. One playthrough can take over tens of hours. Now, Atou used to play this game a lot, since he spent his days switching from one medication to another after his parents stopped coming to see him. Atou got so much involved in the game that he actually forgot about his loneliness. In the end, he managed to become the top player in the rankings, and even started being called the legendary player. Now, thanks to the unit Atou existing, he manages to achieve his only feat before dying. Still, when Atou faces Atou, he is a nervous wreck to Atou's amusement. She chuckles and assures him that everything's okay. Unexpectedly, Atou becomes a full-fledged commentator, remarking animatedly that the player who is officially recognized as a legendary player is Atou. As the first ever nightmare difficulty level has been made clear, playing as the hardest nation, the civilization of Ruin, Minogra. A flabbergasted Atou wonders about how Atou knows so much. She clarifies that she also remembers each and everything that Atou has told her earlier. All those times they conquered the world together, along with the time they got a game over as well. She emphasizes with a flushed face that she remembers everything about Atou. Using Atou was simply Takeudo's policy and playstyle, as his body was always weak, so maybe he wanted to be like her. Still, he feels glad to talk to her like this. He wonders whether he is in heaven, and whether Atou has called him here. When Atou refutes, Atou realizes that the place doesn't appear like heaven, and it actually feels like the one in Eternal Nations. Atou looks at him in bafflement, and then suggests while kneeling down and holding his hands that the world might be a miracle, and they can always start again together. She keeps on being melodramatic by enacting that they both are souls stuck in a strange world, but they can always start again by building their own kingdom. However, Atou is more worried about his body, as he doesn't know what to do with it, since now he can walk more freely. He resolves to test it, so he agrees with Atou to build their own country, a kingdom just for the two of them. Soon Atou introduces herself as elaborately as she can, and offers Atou to sink as low as they can together. Soon the system shows a message depicting information about Atou, who belongs to the civilization of Minogra, with an evil alignment. However, his difficulty level is still unknown. With that, Atou passionately takes Atou's hands into his, and gazes at her with a goofy smile. Soon they both disentangle each other, realizing that they are acting quite foolishly. Still, Atou gets all geared up, puffs up his non-existent chest, and declares that Atou is his only subject, and that their evil nation of Minogra must be first in order to lead the world of destruction. He suddenly remembers with a smile that he was the only one who managed to clear the game with this country. He says aloud that they are becoming shut-ins, so now they must shut themselves in. Even though Minogra is the evilest nation in the official setting, the civilization trait is specialized in internal administration, and has a handicap in combat, making it a super specialized country in domestic affairs. Soon a strange black flame arises from the depths of the forest that can be termed as an ominous call for disaster. Soon a dark presence chants that the forest in the dark continent, the great curse lands. Soon the dark presence refers to someone as Your Holiness and informs him that it is time. Your Holiness refers to that dark presence as Cardinal and wishes to discuss a matter with him. Both Atou and Atou are alarmed by a bone-chilling scream, and for an emergency production, an awkward scout unit, a long-legged bug skids through like rollerblading in a skating rink. Both Atou and Tekuto are disgusted by its hideous appearance. Tekuto reminds Atou that she might remember the bug from the game. However, Atou has seen it inside the game as a 3D model as well. Having no choice, Tekuto clears his throat and commands the bug in the name of the glorious Minagra to check the area around them. In response, the hideous bug slithers itself with its own mucus while making eerie sounds. Tekuto warns the bug to avoid eye contact with any beings as much as it can, as surveying is its main task. With that, Tekuto blows the bug away. Atou was previously worried about that peculiar bug, but now she is relieved to find out that it is working as a proper unit carrying out orders. Even Tekuto can share their vision to a degree. Atou is curious about how much mana Tekuto still has. Tekuto started with 200, and after producing that long-legged bug, he still has 100 left. He feels that he can still make anything if he has enough mana, but the emergency production cost is still high, and he shouldn't be using his mana for that purpose at this point. But then they do need to know their whereabouts. Now, Atou wants to do her best as their military power, but the thing is that she gets stronger as time passes. However, her current combat power is 3. If they encounter an enemy, she might get crushed depending on its strength. Atou has potential, but it is hard to level up. Atou is also one of the reasons why Minagra is so difficult. Meanwhile, the bug is propelling into the forest, with Tekuto using his vision to identify the surrounding terrain. He has gotten a grasp of most of it, but it's just forest everywhere. He assumes that maybe the forest is quite huge. Atou explains that forest terrains have a concealment effect, so it's a deal for them, but having no wildlife is kind of strange. Tekuto suggests they might have to continue scouting for a while. Atou is still regretful as she is unable to do much. Tekuto gazes at her pretty and sorrowful face and assures her that just having her around him is enough. Suddenly, her face lights up with wide glowing eyes. She declares exuberantly to Tekuto that finally, she is extremely delighted. Tekuto smiles blushingly, that although Atou is a hero from an evil country, she can be quite cute sometimes. He is startled by her all-flowery personality and wonders whether she has been like this all the time. He seems so lost in her while staring at her blankly that Atou questions whether he is actually listening to her. Tekuto immediately apologizes to her for getting distracted, when suddenly he gets contacted by the bug. The bug then shares his vision with Tekuto and is astonished to find many strange creatures dwelling at a particular spot in the forest. On a closer look, Tekuto finds out that the spot is actually a dark elf settlement. He realizes with a sigh that he has landed in some fantasy world. Atou informs him that dark elves are neutral but closer to evil, so that is kind of a relief for them. However, a flustered Tekuto knows that those dark elves can be pretty lawful. He begins to fret that if that spot is another country's colony, then they are in deep trouble. Bordering another nation this early is the worst thing possible happening to them. Atou suggests sweatily they must retreat as war is such a barbaric thing. But first, Tekuto decides to watch those dark elves and get more information about them. Suddenly, Atou has this ominous feeling heading towards them, and in no time, they are found by those dark elves, staring at them astonishingly. Meanwhile, in the dark elves area, those elves are perched all distressful and miserable. Many of them are famished due to malnutrition. Their captain Gia ponders that even the children they have prioritized are becoming weaker day by day due to lack of food, and they really cannot continue traveling like this. An elderly dark elf calls out to him, and Gia tries to shun him as he cannot listen to him anymore. Elder Molter knows that he cannot stop Gia anymore, but pleads with him to listen before he leaves. Molter explains that this cursed forest grows at the edge of these uncharted lands. The vegetation looks abundant, but it is said that something evil is sealed within here. Now, Gia is quite curious about that evil, so Molter mentions some king of evil. Molter insists that although Gia doesn't need to know more about the king, he must be careful in the woods. Gia decides to head to the woods because his brethren will starve to death if he doesn't do anything about it. So, he knows that Molter is actually bluffing about his superstition, but he assures him that he has understood everything. So now Gia and some other elves have actually encountered Atou and Tekuto. Gia is quite bewildered to see Tekuto, because all he can make out of him is a mere shadow of a human being. He immediately declares that the shadow is a manifestation of some evil. Gia looks at that shadow sternly and ponders that any action he takes might decide the fate of the entire race. He decides to calm down and have a clear talk with those two oddities. He bows in front of them and introduces himself as the Dark Elf of the Mazaranu clan. Also, he is their captain named Gia Najiev. Gia mentions that he assumes that Tekuto is a noble being and apologizes for having entered the forest, without his permission. Atou smiles and assumes that Jia fully understands the meaning of entering this land. She demands to know the reason he was forced to commit that sin. Jia explains that their dark clan Mazaramu once lived in a land at the center of the Idaragia continent. Meanwhile, Jia secretly observes that Atou seems to be connected to that evil shadow, and she might be as lethal and dangerous. But he has hope that, if he chooses his words carefully, then he might be able to appease her. So Jia begins to ramble again to Atou's fury, who tells him to narrate his story briefly. Poor Jia quickly narrates that they were persecuted and chased out of their land. They had nowhere to go, so they landed up in this forest. A frenzied Jia is not very satisfied with his narration, because he wants to be more dramatic. But he is hit by a lightning bolt when a strange voice comes out from the shadow, regarding him to be quite skinny. Jia wonders whether that bizarre shadow man can actually speak. Still, Jia continues in a more animated way that the persecution was quite grilling, and that's why they fled to this land. They ran out of supplies on the way, and came here to shake off their pursuers, but unfortunately, they didn't manage to find any food. A flustered Jia is constantly angry at himself for not being able to explain himself well. Still, he emphasizes that some of them haven't eaten for days. The proud Captain Jia is forced to bow down in front of some clownish figures in order to beg for mercy, just because he and his clan have trespassed their land. The poor lad is helpless because he feels they don't deserve a punishment like this. He remembers how his clan was mistreated by the oppressors in their own land, and wonders whether wanting to survive is sinful. His negative thoughts are interrupted by the muffled voice of Takudo, Akaya's shadowman, who offers him an apple. He suggests that the fruit really tastes great with a rabbit. Now, Jia and his accomplices were not expecting this. Jia hesitantly holds the apple and observes that the fruit smells really sweet and feels heavier due to moisture. The elves have never seen an apple before. While he is still thinking, staring intently at the apple as if it were a lab rat, his accomplices have already taken a bite from that fragrant fruit. They are amazed by its sweetness and freshness. Jia reprimands them for hogging down those fruits like that, when Takudo offers him some pears as well. Atou is getting bored from that pretend show and chides Jia to accept the gifts her king is offering them so graciously. Meanwhile, Jia's accomplices are munching down the fruits hungrily. Jia begins to tremble out of emotion and suggests that rather than giving the fruit to him, they must be given to his starving clan, which includes children as well. He keeps on banging his head pitiably on the ground, begging that his clan hasn't eaten for days, and day by day they are weakening. Takudo and Atou gaze at him in sheer pity. Meanwhile, in the forest, a mother is trying her level best to put her hungry child to sleep. It is then Jia arrives and urges her to feed the child with some mashed fruit. The mother feeds the child with a spoonful, and thankfully he swallows it. Soon, all the elves feast upon the delicious mashed fruit and bread loaves. Soon, all the elves are fed and are put to sleep. Jia and his accomplices manage to store all the provisions, and having plenty seems like a dream come true to them. Suddenly, the roaring voice of Molter startles Jia, who chides him for being tricked. Molter warns Jia that the evil being would never grant him any alms without any compensation. Not only that, but the words his benevolence should only be used for those whom they respect. Jia in turn yells at Molter about what he should have done in a severe situation like that. He feels that Molter is just wasting their energy by arguing about the one who fed them. Jia reminds Molter that their people are fed and asleep just because of the Shadow Man's charity, even though he is an evil being. Meanwhile, Atou yells at Takudo for using his precious mana like that. However, a content Takudo replies that the more he heard from Jia, the more he pitied him. He thought that Jia might need an ample amount of food for his people. So earlier, despite Atou's repeated warnings, he used his remaining mana to draw food of all kinds from the sky by using emergency production policy command. The elves were flabbergasted to see plenty of food dropping from the sky, and were thankful to Takudo for the miracle, so that they could feed everyone. An elated Takudo watches them satisfactorily, while Atou is about to puke with stress. While the elves are enjoying the food graciously provided by the king of Minagra, who also taught them how to cut and peel apples, Takudo is having a hard time appeasing Atou, who is still sullen due to the forced benevolence provided by him to the elves. She insists that she is not down or anything, so his highness should not worry about her. Takudo understands that both of them decided to use the mana carefully, and he shouldn't have flung it like that. He looks at her intently and requests her help with something, as he cannot do that without her help. Atou mellows down and looks at him remorsefully. Within seconds she is on her knees, begging for forgiveness for being stubborn and going against her king's decision. She then assures him that there is no problem if they produce just that amount of food. Takuto checks out her naivety and ponders that bursting that hot air balloon was so easy. He mentions that the previous day he wasn't able to speak very well. Atou is surprised because according to her, Takuto managed to roleplay as a strong king who dislikes talkativeness pretty well in front of the dark elves. Suddenly, Atou's tube-light mind finally lights up as she remembers that all that hard talk was done by her and not the king. Takuto admits tearfully that he has a communication disorder. He lowers his face and mumbles about how he couldn't talk to nurses and doctors at the hospital as well. He keeps on rambling in a lower tone when a distressed Atou yells at the top of her lungs that they can always tell others that the king is quite stoic and speaks to his trusted vassals only. Not only that, he can always solve a problem in the game as long as he has wealth and military power. Suddenly, the gross bug leads out the nastiest shriek, letting Atou put brakes to her marvelous vocals. Takuto remembers that he summoned it back to their base. By using the bug's vision, Takuto finds out that the elves are heading their way. He assumes that they must be coming to pick up the remaining food. He resolves to make them leave the forest after that. A frenzied Takuto freaks out as he still cannot speak that well to negotiate with them. Atou comes up with an idea and assures Takuto to leave everything to her. Soon Molter pays his respects in front of Takuto and is thankful to receive this opportunity. He introduces himself as the leader of the group of dark elves and is named Molter Cordal Mazaramu. Atou austerely encourages Molter to speak further if he wants to. Takuto remembers Atou telling him earlier to continue playing strong characters. However, Takuto is quite skeptical because they are not strong at all. Molter expresses his regret as he has heard that one of their young ones had misbehaved with the king. He also expresses his gratitude to the king for providing his clan with the much-needed supplies. The elderly elf reasons that it was natural for Jia and his accomplices to show such unsightly behavior after seeing such a great being in front of their eyes. He believes that the great king is not that narrow-minded to be shaken by such trivial matters. Still, he offers an apology on behalf of his whole race on the display of such pettiness before the king's general benevolence. Molter then wishes to know the king's name and identity. Now, this perplexes Takuto, and he basically becomes numb out of nervousness. And then the magical words come out of Atou's mouth. That Ira Takuto is the ruler of the ruined king of the apocalypse. She enforces that the elves must remember the king's noble name. She emphasizes that when referring to him, the elves must call him Ira-sama or Ira-Takuto-sama. Molter bows his head and slams his staff on the ground in affirmation. Then, Atou introduces herself and makes sure that they don't call her Atou-sama. Molter promises that from now on, their clan shall etch their names at the bottom of their souls. Takuto smiles in relief because earlier he was quite anxious, but now he knows that everything is going smoothly. Atou orders Molter and his clan to quickly take away the remaining food or else it will rot. Molter stares at her in amazement, then bows his head again as he requests Atou to tell him how their clan can repay for being saved. Atou wonders whether they can provide anything that will satisfy her king. Molter expresses his lack of knowledge about something appropriate. Atou decides to let it go. Takuto gazes at Atou in curiosity as to whether she is already bored with that drama, because he wants to end this whole roleplay peacefully though. However, Molter insists that there might be something he can do. Atou frowns upon him, reprimanding him for plotting something sinister. A bizarre deadlock kind of situation arises, and Takuto resolves to solve the matter. Takuto clears his throat to gain Atou's attention, and then whispers something in her ear that actually makes Atou sulk and swell like a balloon. She warns him that the elves are really bad at negotiating. He tries to calm her down because even she lacks those important skills. An extremist Atou goes to all lengths and assumes that the elves can harm them if they leave them like this, so Takuto and she must kill them. A frantic Takuto tries to keep her away from becoming Mabaker and suggests that they must come to an agreement where both parties can benefit. Explains that, judging by how they appeared last time, even if they manage to survive a bit longer this time, they will just return to a life of not having anywhere to sleep. For this reason, the poor souls cannot be banished like that. Also, both Atou and Takuto are evil aligned, and the elves are already quite wary of them, so if Atou treats them roughly, then the elves will naturally feel quite uneasy. Atou is thoroughly impressed by Takuto's wisdom and agrees to ask the elves for something in return. As she returns to her self-imagined podium, Takuto wants to enjoy the conversation a bit more as well. Atou calls the elves foolish to think of Takuto-sama as some evil spirit. Molter protests that they would never commit such slander. However, a furious Atou silences Molter abruptly and asks him to rejoice, as the king has finally agreed to receive a tribute in exchange for this offering. Atou adds that the king wants something of the same value. When the elves are puzzled, even the very confident Atou begins to falter and turns to Tekudo for some advice. Tekudo suggests that the elves must update them about the outside world. Molter bows respectfully and complies. Atou mentions that they will compete for the bargain with that as the price. Tekudo has two reasons why he doesn't want the elves to stay in the forest. Firstly, because their race belongs to some other group. If this world functions the same way as the Eternal Nations, then just like in the real world, people of different civilizations and mindsets can cause conflicts. The second reason is the fact that the Dark Elves are neutrally aligned, while Minogra is an evil nation. The land will become cursed eventually, so this land is not suitable for them. He ponders that they have to build a nation, using the forest as a base, so the elves being here will cause a nuisance. On the other hand, Molter hesitantly requests that the king let them reside in the forest. Now, Tekudo is already expecting that from Molter, but Atou refuses flatly, his face saying that they cannot permit that, and that they can always leave the forest after completing the agreement. Tekudo checks out the tired and weary demeanors of the Dark Elves, and a sudden gust of pity strikes him. He knows that they won't be able to make it that far if he abandons them. Tekudo guiltily feels that the rash decision will leave him with a bad taste in his mouth, right after giving them food and all. Finally, Molter thanks Tekudo for permitting an audience with him. With that, he and his accomplices begin to gather the rest of the food, when Tekudo calls out to Molter. He remembers how he was known as the legendary player, and now he has the king's power. With an ample amount of thinking and lots of mustered courage, Tekudo allows the Dark Elves to become his citizens. The Dark Elves are stunned, however, Atou becomes more electrified, and orders the elves to wait while she talks to the king. She literally freaks out and frantically reminds Tekudo that the elves are neutrally aligned. Tekudo already knows that. That's why he wants to use the refugee system to recruit them. In that way, their alignment will change to theirs. Still, Atou is not convinced, as she anxiously mentions her fears that the elves might come into conflict with the main races of Minogra when they produce them. Amused, Tekudo reminds her of the comical bug, and instantly Atou is shown a complete analysis of the bug's statistics. Tekudo questions her whether she can really stand living with that hideous creature. A distraught Atou admits that not only can't they talk to the bug, but also its appearance is quite torturous for her mind. However, it slowly sinks into her that finally Tekudo has an interest in something. She composes herself and addresses the elves that the king plans on establishing a nation from now on. So if the elves become his citizens, then according to the king, their protection is guaranteed. Molter looks dubiously at Gia, who gives him more or less the same look. Molter gathers his courage and questions the king about what would happen to them if they were to become his citizens. Atou places a finger in her mouth and wishes that she could promise eternal happiness to them. But to get straight to the point, one would become evil. However, Atou snickers secretly, as it's surprisingly fun on the other side. 2 days later, both Tekudo and Atou are walking through the forest, where Atou is really fretful about Tekudo's safety. However, Tekudo assures her that now he can move very well on his own. Still, Atou is quite stressed out as she wonders whether the elves will serve them as citizens. Tekudo explains that they won't know until they try. He reasons that the homunculus reproduces fast, and its happiness never goes down, but they are quite dumb. That's why their intellectual buildings always end up behind other nations in research. So getting rid of that demerit is huge. Tekudo suggests they can always have civilized conversations with that race. Here he is talking about Minogra's native race like the bug. Atou senses that the Dark Elves' camp has just arrived, so she decides to stay in front of Tekudo. As the Dark Elves spot Atou, followed by the Shadow Man, they decide not to look at him directly, as they hilariously believe they will turn into shadows as well. Soon the elves bow respectfully in front of the king, as Atou leads Tekudo to a fluffy throne. Atou bellows at the Dark Elves as she welcomes them as immigrants to the country of Minogra. At first Atou stoops on the shadow to urge him to say a few words. Soon a system message is created that states that due to the influx of citizens, a nation was created under a great leader. After the inauguration ceremony, Atou congratulates all the elves for becoming citizens of Minogra. She promises them all happiness and peace in the name of King Tekudo. Some stressful vibes can be felt among some elves, especially when one asks Gia with contempt whether the ceremony is over. Suddenly, Gia is flooded with some painful memories from the past, when hatred rose from deep inside his body. He remembers his oppressors, who persecuted them and hurt them deeply. He visualizes how the tyrants laughed at their worthlessness. Gia feels immense hatred in his heart, as if hatred has become part of his life. This sheer contempt can be easily sensed by Tekudo, who at once questions Gia whether everything is okay. Gia bursts into tears and realizes that this is how it feels to be protected. With that, he shouts a huge hail to the king. In no time, his route is followed by hundreds of roars and shrieks, wishing their king for a long life. Atou smiles satisfactorily, while Tekuto watches the whole scene in bewilderment. Some days later, both Addis and Tekuto are going through some scrolls. Soon, Tekuto dives on the special mattress given to him by the Dark Elves, and falls flat with a thud. Seems like the mattress is built of bricks. However, Tekuto is even more shocked when he comes to know of the news that the two biggest countries on the continent are hardcore good aligned, is spreading around like wildfire. The news scroll further elaborates that one of them is a human nation that worships a good god, and the other is an elven nation that worships nature. Both are freaking out about what will happen to them if anyone finds them. While lying flat on the ground, Tekuto ponders anxiously that it's good that they got information from Elder Molter about the area, but he didn't expect the nations with maximum hostility towards Minagra would be very dominant powers. Now, he realizes that the place from where he started is not at all appropriate. A fretful Atou points out the term forest productivity and cries bitterly as they don't have any food, mana, or minerals. In the game, even without development, depending on the environment, it is possible to produce a certain amount of food and minerals, and that is used as a base for advanced development. However, the current place is unharvestable. Both Atou and Tekuto are in a critical situation. It is then that Molter appears and bows respectfully in front of Atou. He wonders whether he shall continue to explain more about the world that day. However, when he finds out that both Atou and Tekuto are worried about something, he immediately offers his help. Instantly, Gia also appears, and this time he has brought one of his subordinates called Amuru. He excitedly introduces Amuru to the king. Amuru is also in charge of their intelligence. She is very knowledgeable about other countries' cultures and traditions. Gia brought Amuru, as she might be of some use to the king. On behalf of Tekuto, Atou lauds Gia and informs him that the king is very satisfied with his dedication, and they hope for good results that day as well. She advises him that there is no need to be too formal, as the king dislikes strict formalities. Molter agrees that if the king did so, then he would refrain from doing so. The Shadow used to be just an ordinary guy anyway, so that stiff attitude kind of made him feel uneasy. Now, Molter wants to continue from where he left previously, but Atou stops him as that day is scheduled to discuss future plans. The elves have become important members of the Minagra's national administration, so Atou will ensure each of them assumes an important position. She states flatly that this is the king's decision and non-arguable. Elder Molter will mostly be concerned with the country's management, as he can use some magic as well. Gia will continue being the captain. He is instructed to lead the warriors of Minagra. Molter immediately complies. However, Gia becomes more deafening, yelling at the top of his lungs that he will immediately give the order to the men at the king's command. He becomes so wild with emotions that he is even ready to kill babies for the king's sake. Gia smiles, pondering with closed eyes that it all starts here. They will slay uncountable enemies as the king's vanguard. All the people who persecuted them will be punished severely and the king will be so pleased. Little does he know that Tekuto can grasp whatever he is thinking, and the poor Shadow begins to tremble with fear. Suddenly, Gia gets out of that utopic state when the king warns him that there won't be any war since it is so barbaric. Even Atou sternly mentions that the king likes peace. Now, it's Gia's turn to be flabbergasted as he fumbles with his words while digesting the king's words. He bows in head in compliance, but deep down he burns with fury wondering why the king of Ruin is a pacifist. It is then that Molter turns to him and smiles secretly at him. Gia looks at him in stupor. Atou advises them to take plenty of rest, and then after that, they will build some proper houses. Molter smiles at Atou and readily complies. Not only that, he also expresses his gratitude for her infinite compassionate words. He doesn't forget to mock Gia, who can only boast about his strength. However, he on the other hand, can be of service in many areas. Molter grits his teeth and sneers at Gia, and the latter glares back to him. Atou notices the whole scenario and secretly whispers into Tekuto's ears that it appears that the Dark Elves are workaholics. She wonders whether she should order them to collect materials or choose where to build them. Even Tekuto feels that he might have given them the wrong suggestion to rest, as that might not be a good way to use either motivation. He begins to run his horses about finding a thing the Dark Elves are good at. Suddenly an idea strikes Tekuto, and he suggests terrain improvement without destroying the forest, as they are elves after all who love nature. Even this rings a bell in Atou's mind. When the matter is discussed with Molter, He mentions that they are not as good as the elves that belong to the light, but if he were to say so, they do prefer using the big trees rather than the bare ground. However, Gia is on fire as usual because again, the king is not asking anything about destruction, but actually building a forest. Atou can picture the forest looking amazing with the effect of encroachment oriented. Even Takuto is looking forward to it. He advises the elves to do their best, and they must not forget to reforest the whole area. Gia wonders what the term reforest means. Even Elder Molter does not know about it. After a pause, Atou reminds the elves about the previous meeting, in which they discussed fortress construction and iron equipment. She questions whether they have heard about military magic or the 6 elements. Molter knows about the 4 elements, as it is the basic concept of their magic. And Miru adds that magicians usually play supporting characters to warriors, but she has never heard of military magic before. Takuto considered the technological level around smelting, fishing, and fortress construction. Molter regretfully informs the king that their level of magical technology is much lower than what the king expected. He is right because both Atou and Takuto expected the Dark Elves to possess some kind of terrain improvement technology. Atou still wonders why the world's level of magical technology has fallen. If they speed up their development, they will gain a huge advantage. Reforest means planting trees in an area previously deforested in order to preserve the vegetation. In this way, not only the resources are secured, but it has several other benefits as well. When Molter learns what reforest actually means, he conjectures that it doesn't sound like much magical technology is needed. However, he mentions that some trees take over centuries to grow. Atou explains that reforest is a technology that uses magical elements to accelerate growth. With this, she doesn't forget to thank the great king of Minagra, Ira Takuto-sama, who created this technology. Takuto is hit by a 10,000-volt bolt of electricity as Atou keeps on fabricating unnecessary stuff about Takuto. She keeps on rambling about how the elves have experienced the king's mercy and his honor to become his citizens. Poor Takuto tries to stop Atou, but who can actually stop her razor-sharp scissor-like tongue, running 10 times faster than the speed of light. She even goes to lengths describing the greatness of the king and challenging the elves to ask anything from the king. Poor Takuto is on the verge of tears from getting stuck with such a lie spinner. However, Atou goes on by saying that some time ago there was an outbreak of plague in the holy kingdom of Qualia, and many people lost their lives due to the disease. The Qualian priests thought that it might be due to a curse from a demon. They probably hunted down the cats that lived in the cities too much, causing a massive rat epidemic. She further explains that someone dies of the plague, and then the rats eat the body and become hosts for the plague. They have no predators to keep them in control, so the number of rats that come in contact with humans keeps on rising. Atou also explains to them about germs, which are tiny creatures that cannot be seen with the naked eye. There are several methods to deal with it, but bloodletting weakens the body, so it ends up having the opposite effect. On the other hand, praying is effective, but it is not possible to cast it on such a large number of people. Yet again, Atou announces that the king has spoken. Takuto freaks out on such severe role-playing that it actually hurts her stomach. She keeps on blabbering about the blessing and knowledge the king will shower upon them in this land. Suddenly Miru chips in. The apple the king had given them earlier is also a type of food that he created in the land of gods. Atou agrees, however she prefers grapes over them. Tight-lipped Takuto decides to forbid Atou from eating grapes for a while, and Miru throws a bomb on them that the purple lumpy fruit, Acacia grapes, had some seeds in them, so she planted them and they are already budding. Both Atou and Takuto look at her surprisingly, while both Molter and Gia begin to reprimand her for doing something without the king's permission. However, Takuto ponders why he wasn't able to think in that manner. He previously used emergency production, and the things that emergency production created were all from the other world's present era. The in-game emergency production does not produce strategic resources, but what if this only applies to strategic resources that exist in the game? In order to test that, he uses emergency production, and to his delight, he is able to manufacture a coin. But now he needs the industry, technology, and population to mass produce those coins. Even then, if he manages to gather enough mana, he can create the resources that change the shape of warfare in the other world. Takuto's mind begins to race as he comes up with the idea that even oil, which became a trigger for so much killing all over the world, he just proved that he can create it. It's obvious how much of a cheat this is in a world that doesn't even know how to reforest. Meanwhile, poor Miru is trembling with fear, sheepishly confirming with Atou that she shouldn't have planted those seeds without the king's permission. However, both Takuto and Atou smile victoriously at her, lauding her performance, as she actually hit the blind spot. Some new places are introduced to develop the continent of Minagra. The continent of Idaragia is configured like two circles connected to each other. The south is called the Dark Continent, while the north is the Lawful Continent. The Northern Kingdom is controlled by the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, ruled by the humans, and the Elemental Alliance of Elnar, ruled by the elves. These two major countries are building steady diplomatic relations. One of the major contributors to that is the ultimate weapon called the Saint. The continent of Indoragia is home to 7 great saints, and one of them is Saint Solina of Splendid Burials. Solina questions the Cardinal about the conversation they had yesterday, about investigating the omen of the disaster from the Great Cursed Lands. It can be seen that the Cardinal is all frustrated by the heat and the difficult terrain around him. However, Solina suggests that if dispatching the troops is so difficult for him, then she shall go. The Cardinal is more flustered by her offer, but he calmly reasons that in order to mobilize the Order of the Holy Knights, they first need to send a petition to the central government, and then arrange provisions and rewards. They can't just arrange them on a whim. The Cardinal insists that the Saint does not understand her position very well. He reprimands her that she is not a laywoman anymore. When Solina doesn't budge from her decision, a furious Cardinal stomps off, resolving to personally talk to someone who can mobilize some troops. After she is out of sight, the Cardinal haughtily scorns her in secret and calls her a peasant girl. Meanwhile, Solina looks at the poor homeless souls who came to her the previous day, begging for mercy as their villages got destroyed by some roguish goblins, and she decides to save them. Meanwhile, at the Minagra territory in the Great Cursed Lands, an energetic Atou is encouraging and gathering the elves to build new homes for themselves. Takuto's nation has only begun. It must now be fortified and expanded in order to rule over all things and land. For that, Atou is counting on everyone to help with the first step. It has been a few weeks since the Dark Elves became the citizens. Everything is going in an orderly manner, up till now towards great success. Meanwhile, a content Takuto is perched on a magnificent throne called the Stone Pedestal, adorned with royal armor in his very own council room. He is delighted to finally get rid of the hospital gowns and that awful medicinal stench. He is also satisfied that mana is also collected monthly from the subjects of the nation. He has calculated that the amount of collected mana is proportional to the degree of happiness of the citizens. In other words, the happier the citizens, the more developed their country would be. He vows that with his own hands, he will guide his people to the ultimate happiness. Meanwhile, both Atou and Molter are happy to see their king fully satisfied. However, a sparkling Atou makes sure that she musters up all the praise. Soon, Atou begins to act upon the building plan. Firstly, they will create facilities for producing food. This is because an empty stomach is unable to fight with the enemies. However, it is strictly enforced that they won't fight even when their bellies are full. While looking at the plan, Molter raises an important issue. Since food supplies are very important, so can't the king just produce an infinite amount of it? Atou affirms that of course, it is possible for the king. However, once their country's territory expands, distribution problems will arise, so giving the citizens facilities that allow them to harvest is quite essential. Molter agrees with Atou's intelligent response, so Atou places a small potted tree in front of him and asks him to plant and grow it. After that, they need to build a management post, a collection hub, a storage post, and others. Now, Molter tries his level best to work with the tree. However, all his efforts go in vain. He wonders about the species of the tree and is startled when Atou replies animatedly that it is a flesh tree. A hapless Molter requests her to explain further about the eerie named tree. Atou explains that the flesh tree is a food production facility of their civilization. More precisely, a tree that bears a mysterious fruit that tastes just like human meat. All vegans must beware then. This is the first thought that Molter has in his mind, because even though their alignment has changed to evil, he is sure that some people might be opposed to the idea of eating human meat. However, Atou assures him that this is just an experiment for growing trees. Meanwhile, Takuto overhears the whole conversation and realizes that people have either likes or dislikes. Soon, the system flashes a message stating that a facility to be constructed has been selected, and the under-constructed facility is the flesh tree. Next, Atou begins with the second step of planning the research. According to her, the technologies developed through research can greatly propel a country's power, and access to more modern technology is very important for a small country like theirs. Molter wonders what kind of technology Atou would like to begin with, as they don't have much manpower to distribute. An electrified Atou delightfully proposes that they will be using magic. Even Tekudo is all hyped up to hear that. For the first time, even Molter begins to sparkle with some cheerfulness as he has some knowledge of magic, so new knowledge in this area is pretty exciting for him. Atou suggests they will be starting with military magic. As with regular magic, even if one has a great army, one can at most target a few dozen people. On the contrary, military magic can target great extensions of land, deterring even larger troops. Molter is stunned with amazement, because even though he prides himself on magic, it is true that he could at most target a few dozen people, so developing it to the point of overpowering an army is a miracle. He is stirred immensely by the magic known by the king. Soon, the system flashes a message that the item to be researched has been chosen, which is military magic. After that, Tekudo resolves to create a hero while inspecting a particular area. Atou agrees with him, as in this way the cost-risk ratio is quite beneficial. However, Jia is perplexed by the term hero. Atou explains that heroes are subjects of the king, who start out very powerfully. They are all monsters with loose screws, remember the bug and of course Atou. So they have a disposition for becoming stronger as time passes. There are several restrictions with that, so for now they cannot summon all the heroes. However, they can afford one. However, Tekudo is not in favor, since they currently need to keep their stealth, and having an entire army takes a lot of mana, food supplies, and maintenance expenses, so he decides to delay creating one until they have some more leeway. However, a new kind of fear strikes the elves, as Atou mentions the horrendous bounty hunters, who could be out there loose. They might think that there are two elves, Jia and Molter, that have bounty on their heads, while others that have no human rights can be easily sold off for quick money. So Atou suggests that if they have a ready-made hero, then those problems can be solved at once. Who can argue with women, by the way? Molter humbly wonders whether heroes are blessed with such unmatchable strength. Both Atou and Tekudo pause for a moment, and then Atou offers to give a little demonstration of her heroic capabilities. To Molter and Jia's astonishment, several elongated tentacles emerge from Atou's body, and she officially introduces herself as a hero. In no time, her sharp tentacles slice the surrounding trees like butter and cheese. After the marvelous power show, a flamboyant Atou doesn't forget to mention that this isn't even 1/100th of her full potential. A single unit of a hero has the capacity to overpower an entire troop. Jia is fully taken aback by such unfathomable strength, and once again he is enlightened on Atou as well as the great era Tekudo's power. A fully blown Atou blows her trumpet that she has the capacity to kill all of Tekudo-sama's enemies, so they must not worry about military affairs. As usual, Tekudo pricks the balloon to pull out all the hot air by ordering Atou not to forget to clean up the mess, because he is not very pleased to see Atou cutting up the trees randomly, just for her little power show. The elves are as humiliated, as they are supposed to be nature lovers. How can they support such brutality? So when Tekudo leaves, both Molter and Jia offer a gloomy Atou to tidy up. In the coming days, Tekudo urges the dark elves to put the plans forward. After a month, both Tekudo and Atou are pleasantly surprised to see a beautifully built treehouse amidst the neat clearing of the dark forests. Just nearby are many under construction houses built on the same design. So when the elves invite both Tekudo and Atou for an inspection, both of them are thankful to them. And Miru updates them about the progress of the operations. She mentions that since their priority is growing more and more flesh trees, the construction of other houses has considerably slowed down. Next, she shows them the planted trees and states that the joint facility for both cultivation and food storage is proceeding quite smoothly. The land cleared by lumbers is being used as the collection hub, farms, and others. It will also stay as an in-store construction site, in case future facilities require a larger scale terrain. And Miru goes on about water supplies, that a spring has been found. Also, there are plans for boring wells in the future. Furthermore, the building where Tekudo is standing right now is a public office for dealing with all bureaucratic proceedings. But currently, this small-scale building is quite enough. Meanwhile, Tekudo is paying attention to all the details provided by Miru and keeps on mapping everything in his mind. He deduces that for now, what they need are functional facilities. They can build more buildings later on, but for now, they should keep them at a bare minimum. Tekudo is quite satisfied with Miru's performance, because she even took care of those details he didn't specifically instruct her. Tekudo is elated that the three things he chose to focus on for the prosperity of his country are going quite smoothly. Those three things are internal development planning, research facilities, and military planning. He also observes that all the dark elves that looked so beaten earlier are now working with such liveliness. He is delighted by his very first achievement. In the end, Amuro hesitantly asks for their review of the efforts of all the dark elves, who have brought forth their utmost efforts, in order to repay with their lifetime servitude the profound grace their king Ira Takuto has bestowed upon them. Takuto cheerfully assures her he is really glad to have the dark elves as his citizens. Overcome by emotions, Amuro loses control and begins to weep openly. An anxious Takuto tries to appease Amuro to stop crying, while Atou can actually imagine how Amuro must be feeling. Amuro composes herself and begins where she left off. She notifies that daily necessities are still lacking manpower, so for the time being it seems they still have to disturb Takuto about it. She feels perturbed that the king also doesn't have a palace with any domestic personnel. Takuto convinces her that he will take care of the daily items, so she must not worry. He warns her that if she rushes their production, their quality will suffer. The truth is the elves could only develop this fast because of Takuto's emergency production. It is the fruit of using tools he brought from the land of gods. Atou chuckles at the cheat skill they have used. As for the palace, Molter doesn't feel any need for it yet. However, his notion is found quite outrageous by an over-emotional Amuro who cannot believe that Molter can think of such profanity. A frenzied Amuro cannot believe that they can share the same roof as the revered king above them. However, Takuto assures her that it is totally okay with him for everyone to share the same house. Atou explains to him that although the cost of developing a royal palace is quite high, it does generate some extra resources. Also this way, the elves' level of happiness will also rise. Takuto gulps and sheepishly mentions that he always wanted a floating castle. He uses his schoolboy charm to ask whether he can have one. However, Atou finds the idea quite romantic, because the floating castle is the highest level building from the most developed age. Now, both Amuro and Molter are stunned, because even they haven't heard of such an anomaly. Molter wonders how a citadel can actually float in the sky. This is beyond his imagination, but he knows that it might be true if the king says. Molter knows that compared to the king, the elves' minds are so microscopic that anything is possible for the king. Even Amuro's scientific mind is impressed by Takuto's great wisdom. Atou brings all of them back to reality by pointing out that firstly, houses and food production facilities are their priority. Soon, both Molter and Amuro bow again in front of Takuto to swear solemnly one more time to serve his majesty with their bodies and souls. Both yell at the top of their lungs to hail for the long life of the king, and the frail king freaks out by the deafening noise. In the Holy Land of Qualia, there is a religious post called Holy Knight. The Holy Knights are experts in both riding and battling, and are mighty fighters who can create miracles somewhat shorter than a saint. They have complete trust and favor of their people. They are regularly stationed all across the nation, according to the many needs of the state. Under the seriousness of the matter, the Holy Knights as well as the troops of the mercenaries are heading towards those lands. Yesterday, an expedition was dispatched to investigate the danger over the Great Cursed Lands, according to Saint Selina's visions. A Holy Knight is praying to the Holy God Arlos to protect him throughout the journey. The knight is named Lornias, and he is roughly summoned by a high-ranking Holy Knight, Wordle. Wordle wonders angrily how long Lornias is going to pray as they are getting late. Wordle seems least interested in priests and their sermons. Lornias ponders that the emergency has been declared, as it might have to do with the disturbances in the northern provinces. Otherwise, they wouldn't dispatch such a large number of troops for inspection. Lornias reasons that since their emergency troops were meager, they had to involve Sir Wordle. However, not only did they start recruitments with Sir Wordle, but they also couldn't dispatch forces from the national territory. So, Lornias had to make ends meet by hiring some mercenary soldiers. Lornias emphasizes that this shows how little wiggling room Qualia has right now. However, Wordle yams and ignores him, showing his indifference. However, he slaps Lornias back, lauding him for hiring 50 mercenaries just like that. Lornias thinks that Wordle is exhibiting such vulgar behavior and has no class. This is unbecoming of a holy knight who is supposed to be not only a warrior, but a pious man. Saint Selina's jurisdiction is in the northern province, but the Great Cursed Lands are in the southern part of the continent, meaning the dispatching of the soldiers is the responsibility of the Southern Province Congress. Whenever it comes to the Dark Continent, it is always better to be safe rather than sorry. Lornias frowns in wrath that if the reconnaissance mission goes well, then Wordle will get all the laurels, despite his lack of interest and aloofness. However, if it fails, then all the responsibility will fall on his frail shoulders, as Lornias is a low-ranking holy knight with no distinguished lineage to fall back to. Lornias decides to grab the whole situation positively, since Wordle is a high-ranking knight, so their chances of survival are indeed better. He wonders whether this is also God's providence. His thoughts are interrupted by a mercenary named Barget, who jokingly warns him that the road ahead is pretty rough. Wordle mocks Barget that he must join them, as there is a big fat bounty for it. The mercenary chuckles that the bounty is useless if one is dead. He has heard that the business is quite dangerous in the cursed lands, especially for makeshift warriors like him. Wordle shrugs in indifference, as according to him mercenaries are always meant to be bossed around, and if they don't have death breathing on their necks, they cannot fight at all. Barget informs Wordle that some of them are coming from the north, and by them he means witches, to Lornias' bewilderment. Meanwhile, in Minogra, the elves inform Atou that the flesh trees have been completed as planned. They can now produce a steady supply of food to all residents of the imperial capital of Minogra. Not only the food production, but the management of each facility is also going very smoothly. An elated Atou is very much satisfied by the positive results emerging just a few months after the last inspection. Atou beams, thinking that once the construction of houses is complete as planned, the elves can then focus on building a palace. But before that, a baffled Amuru points out at the dark eerie clouds prevailing in the forest, and she wonders about its mystery. Atou assures her that this is proof that this land has become Minogra's and it has turned into cursed soil. A terrified Irumu lets out a small shriek. Atou reasons that everyone who became a citizen of Minogra is not aligned with the evil. Not only do citizens change according to the king, but the soil also undergoes some transformation when it turns evil or cursed. According to Atou, it is a wonderful soil that buffs evil aligned. It begins during work, as well as debuffs the defense of neutral or good aligned beings. However, poor Irumu doesn't get a positive vibe from the word buff, so Atou advises her to take a deep breath, and Amuru follows suit, and instantly she has this refreshing feeling. Not only that, she thinks that now she can eat flesh fruits without any problem. So Atou is right, there is evil in the air. Atou giggles that Amuru is changing, without noticing anything. Still, Atou is worried about something. She feels that the place is quite prominent and remarkable. Meanwhile, the troops coming from Qualia are taking a break at the last stopping point, which is the town's drinking bar. Wordle is holding a huge mug and remarks that this is the last time they will be able to drink. He gawks noisily that this would be the last city they can stop in. He encourages the knights to enjoy the warm food to their heart's content. However, oblivious to the surrounding merriment, Lornias goes through the list of supplies and provisions, and finds out that as usual, they are unable to secure enough provisions. He is worried that there is no guarantee of their lives as they get closer to the Dark Continent. It's quite understandable to him that the number of people is decreasing day by day. The reasons are hostile entities called savages, the poisoned earth, and unknown diseases. The long-nosed Barget wonders whether it's okay for the Holy Knights to consume alcohol. Wordle empties the last drop of the beverage into his throat and condemns the mercenary for saying petty things. According to his self-created belief, the Lord bespoke that he considers the suffering of his people, and once the work is done, they may seek relief. But now who will tell this corrupt soul that relief doesn't always mean partying? Lornias references the quote belonging to the teachings of St. Arlos, Book 3, Chapter 4, and explains the real meaning behind the quote. That it is supposed to be done in the presence of one's family, to be temporarily relieved from one's priesthood. He austerely points out that it doesn't say anything about the consumption of alcohol. However, an already tipsy Wordle ignores him again, holding another mug of the forbidden liquid and chirping gleefully that there must be a difference in the interpretation, and they must hold a holy debate for that. A total hopeless and nutcase, according to Lornias. Still, he controls himself and brings up the main issue in front of Wordle about the saint's prophecy and the actual situation in the cursed lands. Wordle's mood suddenly changes, and he sternly begins to look here and there. Next, he calls out to Barget. However, the latter refuses to disclose anything and tells him that the #1 priority of mercenaries is trust. They understand that there is information that they can't sell. Wordle closes his eyes and declares that this is concerning the witch. A concerned Lornias remembers Wordle mentioning the term witch at the time when they were dispatched. He wonders what he means by that term. Barget gulps down the whole liquor in one go and expresses his insufficient knowledge about the matter. All he knows is that the mayhem caused in the northern region is rumored to be caused by a witch. Barget and his accomplices thought it was a name used by the heretics to refer to some magic creature, but he is not sure. Barget can't even get in touch with the contact of his, who went up there to investigate. The matter is quite concerning for Lornias, because here they are talking about a being that escapes even the intelligent network of mercenaries. He is steadfast that now they must concentrate on the threat, which is equal to the northern region mayhem, and is possibly residing in the Great Cursed Lands. A completely boozed out Barget begins to have terror pangs, as he questions Wordle about the possibility of encountering a witch. The latter assures him that this time, their objectives are quite clear. He knows that the Dark Elves are running away in the Cursed Lands. Now all they have to do is to inspect whether those elves can create problems for them. Now, Lornias didn't know anything about the Dark Elves, so he was naturally surprised. Barget had heard that those Dark Elves were exiled from Elnar and fled to the Great Cursed Lands. According to him, their specialties are assassinations and curses. There is a story about them that they practice heresy, and they fear that a witch will suddenly rise among them. The rumor says that the ones who are named are still at large. Here Wordle refers to the assassin Gia and the cursed sage Molter. Wordle remembers running a blade with Molter and admits that Molter is quite a formidable enemy. However, this time they have strict orders to perform an inspection only, so Wordle advises them not to make a scene. If the Dark Elves come out, and if things get worse, then they must try to flee. Wordle fears that if those creatures combine together, then their blade will run between their country Qualia and Elnar. However, Lornias protests that if they fled from the place, then how much suffering will befall the innocent. He reminds Wordle that they are holy knights, and should there be any evil or menace, it is their duty to fight it. Both Wordle and Barget pause, and there is an uncomfortable silence for a moment. Wordle then refers to Lornias and explains that sometimes as a faithful servant of their lord, they may have to lay down their lives. There is a time when they must stand against evil, but then there must be a reason for one to live, and that applies to Wordle, Lornias, and all the other knights. Wordle continues that when one is young, one may be impatient to prove oneself, but if one only looks at the result, one might commit terrible mistakes. Wordle urges Lornias to always look at the bigger picture. It is then the jolly Molly Barget chips in, informing them that even he has a woman. Wordle chuckles, gruffly remarking on what Barget is doing at the job. When Lornias looks at those basket cases, he prays that the blessings from their god may always be with them. In no time, they encounter one Dark Continent native savage called the Hill Giant. The moment they stepped into the Cursed Lands, they were immediately ambushed by the savages, who needed at least an army to be subdued. Lornias had heard that those hostile beings roam freely in these lands. The savage fiercely bangs his fist to the ground, creating chaos among the troops. Lornias can easily deal with a savage if it belongs to a simple ogre class. However, the mercenaries beg for the knight's support. Lornias yells at them that they all can use their bows to create a diversion. Wordle immediately juts in and commands the archers to stand down, as this time he would go and fight. Lornias anxiously wonders whether Wordle will be okay. Wordle reasons that if the enemy's attention shifted toward the archers, then the problem would arise. Soon, Wordle raises his sword and makes a little prayer for strength in order to fight the evil. In no time, Wordle is faced by a horrifying and humongous savage. Wordle surprises everyone by making expert sword moves that make Lornias exclaim in amazement about the rumored holy sword arts to strengthen the mind with a prayer and the body through God's divine might. All the while, conducting the sword's art is a secret technique of Qualia, as Wordle expertly swings and strikes his sword around the brute. Lornias observes that the holy sword arts not only strengthens the body, but also provides vast advantages against evil beings. Wordle swiftly manages to put down the savage on its knees. He haughtily yells at the giant that he cannot defeat him by just having a huge body. Firstly, Wordle rapidly cuts off the giant's arm and then slashes the sword through its head, thus splitting it into half. A fountain of gore spurts through the savage's head as it is forced to kiss the ground. Wordle suggests that they must get going before other beasts get attracted by the stench of the blood. Barget is completely flabbergasted. Come on, who could have expected such outclassed dexterity from a drunkard, non-serious holy knight? However, Lornias smiles at him with great satisfaction. Finally, when Barget regains his senses, he rushes toward Wordle, lauding his efforts. However, the forever indifferent Wordle shuts him up, urging him to get ready for work. Lornias is content that with the holy sword's art, the whole battle will be a breeze to deal with. Meanwhile, at Minagra, Takuto manages to summon a hero unit, which is an Ike-looking bug, with a drooly claw-like beaked mouth, and that clueless expression as always. Atou marvels at his creation as usual, and Takuto is relieved that the procedure went quite well, as he is really worried that it won't work. Who would have thought that the process required food and resources to be gathered manually, not to mention the mana necessary to channel the magic. The resources used to create the masterpiece are a lot of flesh fruits. According to Takuto, even in the game, it was an interesting implementation. Atou notices that they are making more long-legged bugs as expected. Takuto tries to teach that little Huggy Buggy some manners about cooperating with others. He explains that for their next hero, he planned on producing a support type, one that adds a permanent enhancement to all insect type units. The hero would be Isla, queen of all insects. Large military units require lots of people and an ample amount of money. The cost ratio is quite alarming as well, because the resources required are horses, soldiers, military training, and other resources plus MP. However, producing and training individual units is a lot more cost effective. Not only that, but those individual units can be easily upgraded as well, just like a computer's software or processor. For example, a basic individual long-legged bug can be transformed into a stronger guillotine bug, into an ever stronger insatiable pale bug. Atou is amazed at her king's magnificent idea. Takuto has a mischievous motive, as that while Isla is quite peaceful, the other heroes could have unintended consequences. Later, Takuto notices that it has been too quiet lately, and he would like to deploy more scouts just to be sure. They must take measures, in case the surrounding cities notice the curse late effect. He observes that currently, the Dark Elves are busy with the construction of the basic structures. But he still wants to build a country where everyone can be at ease, and then make a policy that benefits the whole population. Just like his motive has been since the very beginning, he wants to live in a country of peace with Atou and with everyone else. While he is still lost in his beautiful thoughts, Takuto begins to have ominous sensations. Atou becomes fretful, finding him too distraught. Suddenly, Takuto is informed that armed invaders are approaching the forest. The sensation and the vision are provided to him by the long-legged bug unit installed at the forest entrance for monitoring outside trespassing. The bug witnesses several knights marching into the forest. Takuto is distressed because all he wanted was to live in peace. Meanwhile, the holy knights have already delved into the forest, with Lornias and Wordle warily looking around for potential beasts or savages. Takuto checks the knights out and wonders in great perplexity, why do the knights always keep getting in his way? The knights spot the cursed forest at some distance that doesn't allow any life inside. That's why it is called the Great Cursed Land. Barget checks out the map and conjectures that if they go straight, they can easily reach the northern part of the forest. So, he proposes that they investigate the area around it first. Lornias knows that the Great Cursed Land is a very vast forest. They lack the time and human resources to investigate every part of it. They have to find out whether something strange happens in the forest, so he feels that doing a simple investigation will be more than enough. The whole tour isn't required, since it is a simple mission. However, their advancement is abruptly halted by Wordle, who senses something intimidating at the dark entrance of the forest. Soon, a girl wearing dark robes appears from that opening, to their astonishment. Lornias plays the guessing game that perhaps the girl is a dark elf, but it is quite surprising that she could travel in such harsh circumstances, or maybe she is just a lucky survivor. Wordle yells at the girl, demanding her identity and purpose for delving into the treacherous lands. The girl immediately recognizes them as the Holy Knights of Qualia and introduces herself as one of the dark elves who fled into the forest. The girl questions about their business. However, Wordle impishly refuses to answer her question. The girl answers that they were chased out of their homeland and were forced to take refuge in the forest, as the cursed land that has no life can only be the place that bears peace for them. Wordle mentions that they have business in the forest and asks whether they can enter. The girl refuses his request, so Lornias tries to threaten her that their actions and decisions are made by God. Lornias is abruptly interrupted by a flustered Wordle, who wants to do the whole talking. Lornias superficially apologizes, but deep down he is burning with fury at that insult. Later, he plans on reporting all the unholy acts of Wordle to the center. Wordle reasons that they have been given a job by their superiors, so they must enter the forest. The elf girl insists that she has colleagues who will get easily scared, so the knights must not enter. Wordle gets suspicious that something is hidden in the forest that the girl is refusing to reveal. The girl insists that it is a pretty peaceful forest, and that the knights should not be bothered by this tiny dim forest. Wordle discloses that they have received a prophecy that a disaster will arise from this place. Lornias furiously confronts Wordle for revealing the details of their top secret mission to a stranger. Wordle condemns him for chugging like a noisy engine and explains that sometimes they have to spill the beans. Lornias doesn't give up and reminds him that there is a suspicion of an evil cult, so it's really foolish of Wordle to disclose the top secrets of the country to others. According to him, Wordle has sinned for the betrayal of faith, which can be punished. The girl insists that no one in the forest is aiming to harm anyone. The elves have gone through a difficult journey and have finally found peace in these divine lands. Rather, they should be afraid of disasters and not the knights. Wordle is getting tired of that talkative kid, who seems used to negotiating, but is very rude. Wordle senses that the girl has a slight evil aura and doesn't seem like a dark elf. Wordle wonders if the girl would sear something in God's name, and she agrees readily.